Ladies and gents, welcome to Reaction. This is History Summarized, the Meiji Restoration. Yeah, I heard about this, but I don't know what that is. Meiji Restoration. So this is gonna be a fun video, I guess. This is about Japan. But this is by the channel Only Sarcastic Production. Japan may well have the record for world's speediest industrialization. Oh, that's what the Meiji Restoration is. But how did they accomplish so much so fast without falling victim to Europe's favorite 19th century pastime of colonization? And how did Japan build up a pan-Asian empire so damn quickly? All that and more in this deep dive into the Meiji Restoration. I mean, yeah, that is surprising, isn't it? I mean, Japan was really badass during that time. It became really badass, after 19th century or something. They started to, I guess, take over China, Korea, and all other places. Was going against European colonies. So that surprised me, like, damn, Japan. I knew that, feudal Japan and everything was powerful, but going against European power with all the new technology and industrialization technology that Europe had. So that always surprised me, like, Japan is quick, man. They learn so fast. So I guess that's what the Meiji Restoration is. Yeah, it's gonna be a fun video. I've done quite a few Only Sarcastic Production videos already. If you haven't seen them, check out the classes, so please check out for it. Upload lots of videos in 24 hours. You might have missed some of them. Check that out. Check out the playlist too, like Internet Historian, CGP Grey, Oversimplified, and History. And yeah, let's watch this one.
If there's one thing we've learned from spamming the tech tree in a game of Civilization, it's the simple joy of rolling up to a medieval city in an M1 Abrams tank. Normally, this is one of the less historically accurate parts of the game, but the big exception comes in periods of mass industrialization. Within a single lifetime, a society can start from horse-drawn carriages hauling hand-sewn shirts to the local market and end up with an arsenal of steam trains ferrying machine-made clothes halfway across the country. But once people graduate from oohing and awing at a sewing machine, they start getting creative with how to use all this newfound tech to wreak havoc. And this is where militaries can develop truly frightening power disparities. In Europe's case, this made mass colonization an absolute breeze, but today we'll see the extreme counterexample of Japan, who covered centuries of lost ground in the space of mere decades. So, to see how Japan pulled off the world's greatest industrial reverso, let's do some history. The first thing we have to understand is Japan's political structure at the time that this was all going down. The Japanese archipelago had been ruled by an emperor for thousands of years, but since roughly the first millennium, real power belonged to a military leader known as the shogun. The emperor remained the figurehead and the symbolic ruler of Japan, but the shogun had all the samurais, so he was really the one in charge. That said, medieval—
Yeah, I mean, it's simple, isn't it? They had problems, so they went to the, I guess, all the, what the hell, samurais, yeah, I forgot the name. They went to all the samurais for help, and then samurais band together, create a shogunate, and they're like, you know what, we are the bigger army here, we have the power, so screw you. This is where the real power is, at the shogunate. Emperor is just symbolic, I guess.
Japan wasn't centralized in the slightest, and most governing was in the hands of local daimyo, who were basically mob bosses for samurai. But the problem with big sword politics is that it's vulnerable to other people with large stabby sticks, so several daimyo took swipes at the shogun, and in 1467, Japan broke into a century and a half of all-out war. On paper, few things on Earth are cooler than samurai war, but few things are also more disruptive to well-being than 148 years of constant conflict. Things got even dicier with the arrival of European traders, whose show and tell exhibit included Christianity and guns. Well, Jesus didn't particularly affect the trajectory of the war.
Here's a cross, and here's a big-ass pistol.
Firearms made a much bigger and bloodier splash. This mercifully wrapped up at the start of the 1600s when Tokugawa Ieyasu won the war and reasserted shogun supremacy. For the next 250 years, the Tokugawa family ruled a finally peaceful Japan from their new capital at Edo, and their government had one priority above literally everything else: keep the peace. The shogunate confiscated swords from everyone except samurai, they implemented a strict class hierarchy, and they closed Japan to any and all foreigners. Except the Dutch. They're cool, they can stay. Even into the start of the 1800s, Japanese society vaguely resembled medieval Europe, where the country was unified but not centralized. For one thing, taxes were chaos to manage, as the 300 daimyo set their own tax rates and only collected payment in goods. Meanwhile, the common people had to work hard and even endure famines while their taxes paid for samurai to do kendo and write poetry in their abundant free time. This, of course, begs the question of why is there still a warrior class if we're not supposed to have wars anymore?
Yeah.
While the Edo period saved Japan from civil war, 2.5 centuries is a long time to just stay in place. People were hungry, samurai were useless, daimyo were antsy, and also there's a gunship in the harbor. See, hot on the heels of Britain's
I mean, yeah, if you're just gonna say that, I want peace. Nobody can have weapons but samurais. Now there is no war, but obviously they are, bleeding all the common people with taxes and shit. Even if there's famine going on and the samurais are just chilling in their condo or something, I don't know. So people are gonna be like, oh, screw that, this is bullshit. And obviously then trouble is brewing, I guess.
steamrolling China in the Opium Wars, European powers were systematically siphoning wealth out of Asia because what else is an empire supposed to do? At the same time, America was westward expanding so fast that they blew past the Pacific coast and kept on going until west became east and they bumped right into Japan. In 1853, Commodore Matthew Perry arrived with a fleet of gunships and requested the opening of trade relations on the basis of do it or else. With the intimidating might of a steam-powered gunship
And I was like, oh yeah, Japan is closed. America's like, you do see our flag, right? We are Americans. Either open the shores or, the Japan is no more, I guess.
fleet and one model train, America forced Japan to accept wildly imbalanced trading terms, full access to merchant ports, no export taxes, and legal immunity to merchants and diplomats. Soon enough, half of Europe had similar treaties with Japan, and the shogun was powerless to stop it. Japan recognized that America's threats and China's recent thrashing was a warning to shape up or get whacked because there was no way they could resist an invasion, and so far they'd only been experiencing colonization light, with zero military occupation and same exploitation.
Seriously.
Hurdle number one was technology, because steam-powered transportation and high-accuracy shooty sticks made for a massive imbalance. But since they were trading, daimyo and samurai across Japan now had access to rifles and artillery, and some of them started pointing the barrels at the shogun. In 1868, he tried to quash this insubordination, but an alliance of the Satsuma and Chosu domains not only beat the shogun's army, they routed him all the way up to the imperial capital of Kyoto, proclaimed a restoration of imperial authority under the teenage emperor Meiji, and demanded the dissolution of the shogunate. That is one heck of a reversal, but it didn't stop there.
Oh, that is so awesome, isn't it? Samurais are all like, we are samurais, we're badass. We have katanas and shit. We can kill all of you. So I guess we have the power now. The shogun is now the one who has the real power. Emperor is just for the show. Shogun, there you go. Then Americans came. They came with the guns, and everybody's like, now we have guns. Samurai can't do shit now, and they just, I guess, march on the shogunate. And now I guess Meiji, the new emperor, is in power.
The shogun declared war to try and save his skin, but the pro-imperial forces were far better equipped, so they hammered him all the way up Japan and out to the island of Hokkaido. So, some 7 centuries after the first shogunate, the emperor was restored to power. Now, our boyo Meiji was all set for life, but there was still the problem of all those predatory colonizers, so him and his advisors, but mostly advisors, wasted zero time in reforming Japan. The first order of business was reconfiguring the country from a fractured society of feudal lords into a centralized nation-state. That meant sending all of the daimyo into a cushy early retirement and converting their domains into imperial prefectures. And with land
I guess it's the first time where they, I guess, saw a proper, Western power came close to them and see their power, I guess, how powerful they are. I guess the America is the first nation that came to them. And, that was the first time they saw how powerful the nations are in the West, I guess. So at that time, unlike any other country, Japan is like, oh, what the hell? Because Japan has always been that, prideful, militarized type of nation. So they saw that, like, okay, if they invade us, we can't do shit. They are that more powerful. They have guns and everything. So they suddenly, like, broke out of the trance or whatever. And they're like, okay, that's it. We have to do something about, whole government and everything. We have to reform everything. Otherwise, we are fucked if somebody invade us properly.
Reform came standardized taxes, paid with a shiny new currency system which gave the government steady revenue for the first time in literally forever. This afforded Japan the cash to pay for new infrastructure like railway networks and telecom lines. Although Japanese industry was starting from scratch, the emperor was proactive in hiring consultants from all over Europe to come and advise the project, so Japan looked like it was time-skipping full centuries ahead. Really shows how innovation can snowball fast. All this newfound unity also depended on people and a national Japanese identity, so Meiji's second priority was disassembling Japan's rigid social hierarchy of samurai, farmers, artisans, and merchants. Samurai, like the daimyo, were given a pension and politely forced to retire, while the other 3 tiers were brought up to equal status. The caveat is that women were still held in lower regard than men and expected to be good wives, wise mothers, and dutiful laborers in the new textile factory.
Isn't that something? That's a constant everywhere, whether it's, Greek times or even here in the Japanese Meiji Restoration time in the 19th century. That's a constant about women. Everybody's like, women, what to think there, I guess, just be a good wife, get out of here.
Factories. However, there is a caveat to this caveat, as both boys and girls were given 4 years of education. It was clear that sending out scholars to copy Europe's homework would only get Japan so far, so they made a point to give all kiddos the smarts to become Japan's next innovators. And though this may have looked like another copy-paste of Western schooling, it encouraged a distinct Japanese identity through the teaching of national culture and a standardized Japanese language. Additionally, these schools co-opted elements of the Bushido code.
Okay, so Japan is basically like, oh, what are they doing there? Oh, okay, so I guess we are going to create Japanese version of that and just become an industrialized nation now.
Historically, it wasn't much more than a loyalty oath between a samurai and his daimyo, but it was embellished with honor and virtue to echo European chivalry and fully mythologized into a pillar of Japanese identity. Meanwhile, in art, sculptors and painters alike were incorporating Western techniques to create totally new works, and painting developed into 2 new styles: Yoga, which was naturalistic and very photoreal, and Nihonga, which was very traditional and stylized. In architecture, Western building materials found use in Japanese designs, and in 1889, the emperor lifted a ban on Hanafuda playing cards, so a new little company called Nintendo began printing them. So when you fire up Breath of the
What?
Wild, say thanks to your old pal Meiji.
That's how old Nintendo is. I wouldn't have thought of that. Late, I guess 1800, 1890, whatever he said that. Damn, that's old.
Now, beyond a centralized government and a unified populace, Japan desperately needed some defenses against bigger and stockier European militaries. That meant echoing the big boys and creating a Western-style conscript army, with 3 years of mandatory service where everybody fought as Japanese soldiers rather than bands of dubiously loyal samurai. And speaking of, this was their last slap in the face. They'd lost their social rank and their military honor, and their stipends were yanked too. Meiji saw them as a relic that was too dangerous to use and too expensive to not use. In 1877, the samurai of Satsuma tried to rebel against this affront to their dignity, but the army stomped them and axed the samurai for good, which, hey, reforms worked. Now, all of these changes beg the question of whether modern could exist outside of Western, and since Japan was the first outside nation of the post-industrial party, they had to figure out for themselves if they could meaningfully remain Japanese despite enjoying all of this progress. We definitely do not have the time to cover all of the biases baked into the concept of development, but for Japan's purposes, the one key trait that kept them distinct from Europe was the emperor. Sure, Europe had monarchs aplenty, but they weren't as culturally and nationally vital as the emperor, especially now that Meiji was head honcho again. So even when Japan adopted a constitution in 1889 with a prime minister, cabinet, bicameral, and slightly elected legislature, that constitution was officially a gift from Emperor Meiji, and he remains the focal point of Japanese pride and identity, even if Meiji maybe left all of the governing to his advisors. And this
Wait a minute, isn't that the case with Britain too? I mean, all the government, everything falls under the Queen. I mean, that's how it goes, right?
This idea of Japan being unique from and even in competition with the West became a driving principle of their foreign policy, as they began freeing Asia from the grip of Western imperialism with Japanese imperialism. Alrighty, let's see how this all goes wrong. So, in 1879, they annexed the Ryukyu Islands, and in 1894, they nabbed Korea on the logic that, hey, if not us, it would have been some Westerners, and besides, we can help you to modernize.
So I guess industrialization is like a perk point or something, a new ability. Japan got it just like the Western and European countries. Japan is like, what are they doing? They're colonizing Asia. Yeah, so let's do that. Let's do that. Now Japan is going to colonize Asia, and we're going to tell them, yeah, it's better us than, I guess Europeans.
Koreans weren't thrilled, and they called in China for backup, but Japan absolutely thrashed China and annexed Taiwan afterwards because, heck, why not? If you're seeing any parallels to the Fire Nation, that's intentional. Japan also got more suspicious of the West, who ended the unequal treaties but were also pushing to deny this new sphere of influence. This might have worked against the shogunate in 1853, but we're in the 1900s now, and Japan was 4 training montages stronger, so they rolled up to nearby Russia and utterly flattened them. This surprised pretty much everybody, and
Seriously?
Russia's monumental embarrassment only fueled Japan's newfound imperialistic pride. In 1912, Emperor Meiji died
Russia, during the, I guess, with just react to the Otto and Bismarck series. Obviously, at that time, Russia was a powerhouse, France was a powerhouse, and Bismarck was, I guess, playing all around that. This is European powers. Now, one of the European powers went to them, Japan just kicked their ass. Everybody like, what just happened? Japan did what? Who's Japan? What's a Japan? Where'd that come from? Everybody looks to America. Oh, you did that shit.
after 44 years on the throne, but the empire kept on growing. Though Japan got to sit at the treaty table after World War I, suspicion of the West only deepened as Britain and France went on a massive post-war land grab. Japan tried to include a racial equality clause in the preamble to the new League of Nations, but big shock, it got voted down. So now, Japan felt like all this post-war high-fiving was just making an ever smaller cool kids club of who gets to do empire. Which, well... Inspired by this attitude as well as their unbroken string of victories, Japan's military became more dominant in politics, and in 1932 they invaded Manchuria with a push into China proper in 1937. By 1940 they expanded south into French Indochina, and America issued an oil embargo against Japan to try and keep them in check. The next year, Japan tried to go 2 for 2 on Western smackdowns and bombed America's Pearl Harbor, and by 1942 the Japanese Empire encompassed nearly all of East Asia, yoinking the American Philippines, the Dutch East Indies, and Thailand. Needless to say, this did not last, and Japan was forcibly disempired in 1945. So,
yeah, I guess he just walked past the bomb there. So let me get this straight. Meiji Restoration came to be because America's like, yeah, we want to trade, but we are not going to invade you like Europeans do. So Japan learned all the Western shit, then became industrialized, became powerful, started to kick everybody's ass. During World War I treaty, they were treated like they had nothing in the background, so they got pissed off, started to invade China and everything. America's like, that's illegal, and then they start to invade every other place and bomb Pearl Harbor. And America like, oh, that does it. We taught you everything, and we're gonna take it away and throw the atomic bombs in the end. And that's World War II over, I guess. And since then, they're making Toyotas and Honda.
what can we learn from this century of the Meiji Restoration and Japanese imperialism? Well, it's as much an instruction manual as it is a cautionary tale. First off, it's an excellent role model for how any country, even one isolated in place for 250 years, can actually flourish into something greater.
Seriously, this surprised me, how closed Japan was, and how suddenly like, oh shit, we are so weak. European powers and Western powers are way too powerful. We have to learn, and they actually learned that fast. Became industrialized that fast. That just that says something. Why today all the Japanese think how I guess punctual they are, and how they're all the companies, Toyotas and Hondas, how great they are. That shows that they're just work ethic and the way of thinking, how strong that is. And this is one of the example of that in Meiji Restoration, how fast they become industrialized.
Also shows that modernity will look slightly different for everybody, that there isn't some single formula for how society should be. But of course, it's impossible to detangle this modernizing renaissance from Japan's runaway imperialism. And since there's no simple culprit, this period offers a great chance to investigate just what can lead a state like Japan down the slope to imperial villainy, from self-defense to growing national hubris to carte blanche conquest. As with Europe, as with Asia, imperialism is a hell of a drug.
That's
Thank you so much
reference.
for watching.
I think that's Sapelso reference, right? Yeah, who's that? I guess singer or whoever that was that said. I forgot that. Yeah. So obviously during the Meiji Restoration, Japan became industrialized. They were worrying that will we lose the Japanese identity or the culture? Clearly they did not, because during the World War II, all the kamikaze and suicidal shit, which kind of feels feudal Japanese. Where any samurai and warriors, if they got defeated, they kill themselves or something like that. So for pride, I'm gonna kill myself. That mentality was still alive, or in World War II. So they became industrialized, but still had their Japan cultural identity still in place, I guess. Damn, that's what the Meiji Restoration was. I didn't know that. All right, that was from the Wally Sarcastic production. If you like my reaction, don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out the lyrics I did this link in the description. Check out the cast walls, please check out the end cards, and I'll see you next time.